The topic for this video has been chosen by Megan Humble because she won my surprise elemental competition and her prize was to pick the topic. And she picked the role of women in the past. Now, Megan, that's quite a big topic, so I hope you'll forgive me if I cut it down rather a lot. And I'm going to have to paint with very broad strokes because, you see, there really was an awful lot of past. I mean, really, years of it. And there were an awful lot of places in the past for almost all of it. And most people at any given time in the past were women. You see, women lived longer than men. They live longer than men now, and in the past they really did live quite a bit longer than men. Male babies died more than female babies. Men who were 80 died of old age more than women who were 80, and at every year in between, men were more likely to die. Yes, it's true that childbirth today is a great deal safer than it used to be, but the perils of childbirth in the past are often somewhat exaggerated. And there are so many things that kill men. They did more dangerous jobs, and in wars and so forth, they did almost all the dying bit. So at any given time in the past, there were quite a few more women than men around. And that's one of the reasons that women had quite a bit of power. So that's what I've decided to talk about, if that's all right. I'm going to talk about the power that women had in the past. Now, there is this term, you've probably come across it, his story. History, his story, and most of the time the people using it are being quite impertinent, annoying and tiresome, and I wish they'd stop. But there is a point to this, because it is true that particularly in the ancient and medieval worlds, most historians were male, and so when they wrote down history they were writing down their stories, so each wrote his story, if you like, and so there was a male bias towards history. But to be fair to these men, I think actually had women been writing histories, they would have covered an awful lot of the same ground, because historians are interested in the big stuff, aren't they? They're interested in wars and the forging of nations and kings and rulers and what they do, how one group of people behaves to another, how this tribe dominates that tribe, and there was a war or a conflict or a trade dispute or something between them, and that's the stuff that gets written down. New technologies coming in and so forth. It tends to be, the stuff that men are doing that gets written down as history, whereas in fact, in day-to-day life, an awful lot of power was in the hands of women. It's just that it wasn't the sort of stuff that got written down in history. Now, a lot of people, when they're trying to make some argument about women in the past, will point at exceptions. They go, "What? Elizabeth I, there you go, you see, women could be really strong and powerful and successful and all the rest of it." And yes, Elizabeth I of England was a very powerful and successful monarch. She was extremely intelligent, and she got this country through a very difficult patch and left it a great deal stronger than she found it. So terrific. But she was quite definitely exceptional. Most powerful monarchs were men. There are far more powerful and good kings in the past than queens. It's just simply the case. And though there are some amazing rags to riches stories, like a slave girl of the harem who ends up becoming de facto ruler of the Ottoman Empire. Yep, that happened. But again, you're looking at the exceptions. Wouldn't it be more instructive really to look at the generality? And some of the exceptions that get picked and get trotted out again and again actually do annoy me. I'll just talk about two. Boudica, she comes up again and again. Joan of Arc. People say, oh, there you go, women could be strong, they could fight in battle. No. There is no evidence at all that either of those women did any fighting in battle. Joan of Arc stood around carrying a banner in armour, and she inspired the men. And I think actually both those women were almost certainly pawns of other people's ambitions. And it's rather important, I think, to remember that both of them quite quickly came to sticky ends after becoming famous. Actually, it's a bit of an aside here, Megan, I hope you don't mind. But can I just remind you, gentle viewer, just in case you'd forgotten, that yes, while it's true that Joan of Arc was tried and executed by men, they were French. She was tried and executed by the French. That's something that for some reason just keeps getting forgotten in retellings of that story. Right. Anyway, now one of the things I liked about the BBC HBO co-production called Rome was that there were three strands to the story. There was the history stuff, the stuff that we're all familiar with, Caesar, battles, Pompey, Crassus, all that lot, and the stuff that got written down. And then you've got the ordinary man, you've got Lucius Vorenus and Titus Pullo, and there's a sort of central strand running through the series about what the ordinary people were up to. And there's a third strand, the often neglected strand, which is what the women behind the scenes were up to. It's about the aristocratic women, people like the evil Attia, who, granted, is in Rome, in the series Rome, is largely a work of fiction based on a real person, but we don't know really what she was doing behind the scenes. But what they give her to do is all quite feasible. You've got to imagine that there were powerful, intelligent, educated women who could read and write, and these were the mothers and the sisters and the daughters of the big players. Of course they knew loads about what was going on. Of course they had the confidence of a lot of these people. Of course they had influence. Do you really think that none of them could have influenced in any way anything that all these men around them were doing that became part of history? I think it's frankly an insult to women to imagine that they were just, I don't know, polishing the nails and weaving or something. No, 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 no. When you're that interested in the fate of those around you, you use what influence you can. And I'm quite sure that those women had a lot of influence on what happened. Now, the ordinary woman. So most of the time, most people are not deciding with whom to go to war, or whether to fight a duel, or whether to invent a new amazing thing. Most of the time, people are interested in whose turn is it to do some chore or other, what are we having for dinner tonight, those things. And therefore, I put it to you that most decisions, most power was influenced most of the time by women. Partly because most people were women, that's one reason, but also households were run by women. And it's interesting. Here's a nice example. In the Iliad, which you could say is a very macho world, it's lots of big warriors, and it's taken as read all the way through the Iliad that if a woman is on the defeated side, she's very likely to be captured and enslaved and taken away. That is the fate of women of the losing side in the war, it seems, in Homer's world, and yet it is also absolutely taken for granted and goes unquestioned that women indoors rule. When Priam wants to give Achilles a gift of some linen from the linen closet, he has to go to his wife to ask permission and get the keys. The keys to the treasury, they hung from the girdle of the queen, not the king. And you can imagine in an ordinary household, keep out the pantry. Guys, you're not allowed to go in there. There'll be some woman, some matriarch in the house, and she decides what we're having tonight for dinner tonight and tomorrow night. And no, you're not to go in there because the ingredients that you want to have a snack on now, they're for tomorrow's lunch, okay? And she's not going to let you in there. And after a while, okay, fair enough. Yep, you rule the roost in here. I'll go and do some ploughing. That's more like my kind of thing. Bye. And women had a lot of influence on very important stuff. For instance, the hiring and firing. The hiring and firing of servants and slaves. That's a really big decision. I mean, that's very direct influence over the way someone else's life is going to go. You're fired. We're hiring you. We need a new scullery maid. Those sort of decisions, by and large, taken by women. Now, today in Britain, estate agents know that if they're showing a married couple around a house that they're thinking of buying, with the exception of if they're just married and this is their first purchase. But apart from that case, don't listen to the guy. Don't even talk to the guy. Just concentrate on the woman. She's the one who's going to be deciding whether the couple buys this house or not. Now, indoors, women ruled. It was their domain. They decided what we have to dinner. They decided what they often ran the household's expenses. Which, if you are controlling the treasury of a household, you have a lot of power. They also. If I use the word gossip, that sounds pejorative. It sounds as though I'm criticizing women, and that's not what I mean to do. But there is this term gossip, which is talking about what's going on, who's on the up, who's on the down, who fancies whom, who might be having an affair with whom, all that sort of stuff, monitoring the relations between all the people in a household. That was something that women did a lot. And it gave them information, useful information, which made it easier for them to get and hold on to power. The power to decide what, by and large, happens day in, day out in their daily lives. Which for most people, most of the time, is actually the important stuff. Because most of the guys, don't forget, aren't actually deciding on whom to go to war with. Most guys are not operating at that level. They're not the generals. They're not the kings. They're just the lowly workers. So there you go. Most of the time in the past, women ruled. And that's partly because men tended to get killed a lot. Granted, that was by other men. The Indie Man!